You know that feeling when you're walking through a dark forest and you hear something breathing right behind you? That feeling that says run, but your legs won't move? That's what every alien species in the galaxy felt the first time they saw a human smile at a void-born and say, "Ah, look at those little eyes. I'm keeping it." The Vri Council chamber floated in the heart of the Andromeda Compact, a sphere of polished obsidian and bioluminescent vines that pulsed with the collective heartbeat of 17 allied species. Ambassador Thessal of the Ktharn stood at the central dais, his chitinous mandibles clicking in a rhythm that conveyed deep concern, a rhythm the translation implants rendered as a low, humming worry. "The creature has been spotted near the Trellis trade route," he said, projecting a holographic image into the center of the chamber. The image showed a mass of absolute blackness, something that seemed to drink the light around it. Tendrils curled from its center, each one lined with microscopic hooks that could shred molecular bonds. A void-born juvenile. Estimated size, 300 meters across. It has already consumed 2 automated freighters and a research outpost on Krell 7. The chamber erupted in nervous chittering, clicking, and the wet slap of tentacles against armrests. Ambassador Yix of the Florin, a being composed entirely of crystalline growths that caught the light like shattered diamonds, emitted a sharp tone of distress. "The last void-born incursion cost us 12 worlds," Yix said, her voice a symphony of breaking glass. "The Compact's combined fleets barely drove it back into the interstellar void. And now you tell us a juvenile is in our shipping lanes?" Thessal's mandibles clicked faster. "Worse, the juvenile is behaving strangely. It's not following typical void-born migration patterns. It seems to be hunting, deliberately, methodically." A holographic map expanded to show the creature's trajectory over the past 70 cycles. The path wasn't random. It was a deliberate spiral through the Compact's most valuable trade routes, as if something was driving it, or as if it was searching for something specific. "The Vri Council proposes a coordinated response," Thessal continued. "The Ktharn will commit 40 dreadnoughts. The Florin have offered their rift cannons. We need every allied species to contribute. We need to talk about the humans," interrupted a voice from the far end of the chamber. Silence fell. The kind of silence that happens when someone says something so absurd that everyone needs a moment to process it. Ambassador Quellen of the HSS TAC, a serpentine creature coiled around a floating platform, her scales shifting through colors that indicated amusement, repeated herself. "The humans, the newest members of the Compact. They have something we might use." Thessal's mandibles stopped moving entirely. "The humans? The species that evolved on a death world so hostile that their own biology is built around injury recovery? The species that only achieved faster-than-light travel 70 cycles ago and still can't agree on a single planetary government? Those humans? The very same," Quellen said, her scales flashing a calm, steady blue. Yix's crystalline form crackled with static laughter. "What could humans possibly offer against the Voidborn? Their warships are barely capable of system patrol. Their weapons are kinetic projectiles and explosives, primitive technology that hasn't advanced in centuries by our standards. They don't even have energy shielding on most of their vessels. They have something else," Quellen said, and her tone made the chamber go quiet again. "Something the HSS TAC observed during their application for Compact membership. The humans brought a delegation to our homeworld. Do you remember what they requested during the cultural exchange?" Thessal searched his memory. "They asked for samples of local wildlife?" "No, that's not right. They asked to keep samples. As pets." "Exactly," Quellen said. "The human delegation spent 3 days in our equatorial containment zones. Do you know what species they requested to take back with them?" No one answered. "The HSS TAC Razor WRM," Quellen said. Every ambassador in the chamber shifted uncomfortably. The Razor WRM was a Class 4 biohazard on the HSS TAC homeworld, a 6-limb predator with venomous spines, the ability to camouflage itself against any background, and a hunting strategy that involved playing dead for weeks before striking. The HSS TAC had spent centuries trying to exterminate them from their agricultural zones. And what did the humans do with it? Yix asked, her crystals dimming with genuine curiosity. Quellen's scales rippled with something that might have been admiration or horror. It was hard to tell with the HSS TAC. They put it in a domestic enclosure. They named it Fluffy. They posted holographic recordings of it sleeping on their furniture. One of their children was observed riding it during a planetary festival. The silence that followed was so complete that Thessal could hear the faint hum of the chamber's gravity generators. The humans are insane, he said finally. Perhaps, Quellen agreed. But consider this. The Razor WYRM has not harmed a single human since their initial contact. The humans have, by their own account, trained it to respond to vocal commands. They have integrated a class, 4 biohazard, into their domestic environment to the point where it is now considered a common household companion. Yix's crystals flared bright with understanding. You're suggesting the humans might be able to interact with the Voidborn, the way they interact with other dangerous species. I'm suggesting, Quellen said carefully, that the humans have a documented history of forming bonds with predators that every other intelligent species in the galaxy considers untouchable. They don't see danger the way we do. They see potential. Thessal's mandibles clicked in agitation. The Voidborn is not a Razor WYRM. It's a cosmic entity that exists partially outside our dimensional framework. It doesn't have a brain we can understand, let alone a psychology that could be influenced by vocal commands and treats, which is exactly why we should consult the humans, Quellen pressed. Their approach to danger is fundamentally different from ours. We see threats to be eliminated. They see problems to be solved, often in ways that make no sense until they work. The debate continued for another hour, but the outcome was inevitable. The compact was desperate. The Voidborn juvenile was cutting a path of destruction through their most vital trade routes, and every conventional military solution had failed. The Ktharan had lost 3 dreadnoughts in their last engagement. The Florin's rift cannons had only seemed to annoy the creature, so they called the humans. Ambassador Chunwei of Earth arrived at the Vri Council chamber with an assistant, a translator droid, and a small container that she placed on the floor beside her chair. She was a small woman by human standards, barely 1.5 meters tall, with gray streak hair pulled back in a tight bun, and the kind of tired eyes that came from decades of diplomatic service. She also, the other ambassadors noticed, kept glancing at the container with what looked like affection. Ambassador Chun, Thessal began. Thank you for coming on such short notice. We have a situation that requires the Voidborn juvenile, Chun interrupted, nodding. We've been tracking it. Nasty piece of work, those things. The reports say it's already destroyed 3 Ktharan dreadnoughts and damaged a Florin rift station. You've been tracking it? Yix asked, surprise evident in her crystalline tones. Why would humans be tracking a Voidborn? Chun smiled. It was a strange expression. Humans smiled for many reasons the ambassadors had learned, and not all of them indicated happiness. This one looked almost eager. We like to know what's happening in our neighborhood, and we've had our eye on the Voidborn for a while. Interesting creatures. Creatures, Thessal repeated, his mandibles clicking in disbelief. You call them creatures? They're existential threats. They consume matter and energy indiscriminately. They don't communicate, they don't negotiate, they don't do any of those things yet, Chin said. She reached down and opened a container. But maybe they just haven't met the right species. A small head poked out of the container. It was roughly the size of a human fist, covered in iridescent scales that shifted through colors no one in the chamber had ever seen before. 2 large eyes, disproportionately large, almost childlike in their proportions, blinked at the assembled ambassadors. Then, the creature let out a sound that the translation implants struggled to parse. It sounded like a purr. What? Thessal said slowly, is that? Chun lifted the creature out of the container and cradled it against her chest. It was about the size of a small rodent, with 6 tiny legs, a long prehensile tail, and scales that seemed to absorb and reflect light in impossible patterns. This is Sparky. We found him near the edge of human space about 6 months ago. He was alone, injured, and very, very scared. The chamber erupted. You found a void-born juvenile. Yix's voice cracked like a falling chandelier. And you kept it? Found him abandoned, Chun corrected gently. Void-born mothers sometimes leave behind the runts of their litters, we've learned. The strong ones survive. The weak ones get left adrift. Sparky here was barely alive when our deep space survey vessel picked him up. She scratched the creature behind what might have been an ear. It purred louder. You've been studying it, Fess Sal said, trying to regain control of the conversation. That's acceptable. Scientific research. But you said you kept it. As in, he lives in my quarters on the diplomatic station, Chun said. He eats processed protein paste and seems to really enjoy classical human music. Beethoven, specifically. He gets agitated when I play anything with too much percussion. The chamber went very, very quiet. Ambassador Chun, Quellen said carefully, her scales shifting to a deep, thoughtful purple. Are you suggesting that the void-born can be domesticated? I'm suggesting, Chun said, still stroking Sparky's iridescent scales, that no one's ever tried. Every species in the compact sees a void-born and thinks weapon or threat or problem to be eliminated. Humans see something else. We see a creature that might just need a friend. That's insane, Fess Sal said flatly. Probably, Chun agreed. But Sparky here has been living with humans for 6 months, and he hasn't tried to consume anyone's ship or tear through dimensional barriers. He's just been a pet. A weird, occasionally unsettling pet that can somehow phase through walls when he's frightened, but a pet nonetheless. She set Sparky on the floor. The tiny void-born immediately scurried toward the center of the chamber and began investigating the holographic projection of the juvenile void-born. It touched the image with one tiny claw, then looked back at Chun with what might have been recognition. He knows what that is, Yix observed, her crystals dimming with something like awe. He recognizes another of his kind. Of course he does, Chun said. They're social creatures, the void-born. We think. We're still learning. But Sparky gets lonely when we're away from him for too long. He gets anxious. He needs companionship. Fessel's mandibles clicked rapidly, his species equivalent of a frustrated sigh. You're suggesting we befriend the juvenile that's tearing through our trade routes? Approach it with what? Treats and kind words. I'm suggesting, Chun said, that you let us try something before you throw more ships at it and get more people killed. The human way. And what is the human way? Chun smiled again, and this time there was something in her expression that made every ambassador in the chamber feel very, very strange. It wasn't fear exactly. It was something more unsettling. It was the smile of someone who had looked at an impossible problem and decided, with complete confidence, that it was actually just a misunderstood puppy. We're going to give a name, Chun said, and then we're going to give it a reason to stay. The human ship Atlas was, by compact standards, a piece of junk. It had been cobbled together from salvage parts, retrofitted human engineering, and what appeared to be a significant amount of duct tape, a human adhesive product that the ambassadors had learned to regard with a mixture of horror and grudging respect. The ship's hull was pitted with micrometeorite scars. Its engines emitted a radiation signature that made Catharan engineers wince. Its life support system occasionally recycled the same air for days at a time, which apparently didn't bother humans because they were used to breathing their own waste. But it was fast. Faster than anything the Compact had expected from such a primitive vessel. And it was crewed by 8 humans who had volunteered for what they called first contact with an aggressive non-sapient entity, and what everyone else called suicide. Captain Marcus Holloway stood on the Atlas's observation deck, a converted cargo bay with a transparent aluminum viewport that was definitely not rated for deep space stress, and watched the void-born juvenile drift in the distance. It was beautiful in a terrible way. A mass of absolute darkness that seemed to swallow the starlight around it, with tendrils that curled and uncurled like the legs of a sleeping spider. At its center, if you looked closely, there was a faint glow, something organic and alive, pulsing with a rhythm that reminded Holloway of a heartbeat. "She's scared," said Dr. Meera Patel, the ship's xenobiologist, as she studied her readings. "Look at the tendril movements. That's defensive posturing, not hunting behavior. She's injured, and she's lashing out because she doesn't know what else to do. She's destroyed 3 dreadnoughts," Holloway pointed out mildly. "Because they shot at her first," Patel said. "Wouldn't you lash out if something started shooting at you when you were just trying to find food and safety?" Holloway had been in the human military for 20 years. He had seen combat, lost friends, made decisions that still haunted his dreams. He had learned to trust his gut instincts, and his gut instinct right now was that Dr. Patel was absolutely right and also completely insane. "You really think we can do this?" he said. It wasn't a question. "I think we have to try," Patel said. She held up a small device, a modified translation unit that had been recalibrated to emit frequencies in the Voidborn's suspected communication range. "Sparky's been helping us map their vocalizations. There's a pattern to it, Marcus. A syntax. They're not mindless. They're just different. And no one's ever bothered to learn their language because everyone's too busy shooting at them." In the corner of the observation deck, Sparky chirped in agreement. The tiny Voidborn had grown since arriving on the Atlas. He was now the size of a small dog, with scales that shifted through colors so rapidly that it was almost hypnotic. He had bonded with the crew in ways that none of them fully understood, following specific humans around the ship and apparently learning to anticipate their needs. He had, on one memorable occasion, phased through the wall of the mess hall to retrieve a dropped fork. The crew had stopped being surprised by him about 3 weeks into the mission. That was the human way, Holloway had realized. They adapted. They normalized the impossible. They looked at a creature that should have been a nightmare and said, "Huh, he likes scrambled eggs." "All right," Holloway said, taking a deep breath. "Let's go make a friend." The Atlas approached the Void-born juvenile at 1/4 impulse, its engines sputtering in a way that made the Ktharn observer on the bridge, a grudging addition requested by the compact, whisper prayers to his ancestors. The juvenile's tendrils twitched as the ship drew closer, and the pulsing glow at its center intensified. Reading increased energy output, reported Lieutenant Sam Chun, no relation to Ambassador Chun, though the crew had started calling him Ambassador Jr. anyway. "She's charging up for something. Evasive maneuvers on standby," Holloway said. "Meera, you ready?" Patel was already at the communication station, her fingers dancing across the modified translation unit. Sparky sat on the console beside her, his scales flashing in a pattern that seemed to mirror the juvenile's own pulsing rhythm. He was communicating, Holloway realized. The little Voidborn was reaching out to the bigger one, using the same language they had spent months decoding. "Signal transmitted," Patel said. "Now we wait." They waited. The juvenile's tendrils stopped moving. The glow at its center dimmed slightly, then flared bright. A sound echoed through the Atlas's hull. Not a sound that traveled through vacuum, but a vibration that resonated through the ship's structure, a deep thrumming that Holloway felt in his bones. "What was that?" he asked. Patel's eyes went wide. That was a response. She's asking who we are. She's communicating." No one on the bridge spoke for a long moment. The Ktharn observer had gone very still, his mandibles frozen mid-click. "She wants to know why we're not shooting at her," Patel continued, her voice trembling with excitement. "She doesn't understand. Every other ship she's encountered has attacked her immediately. She thinks this is a trap." "Send back a greeting," Holloway said. "Tell her we're not here to fight. Tell her we have Sparky. Tell her we found one of her kind, and we've been taking care of him." Patel transmitted the message. Sparky chirped again, louder this time, his scales flashing in a pattern that seemed almost urgent. The juvenile's response was immediate. The glow at her center flared so brightly that the observation deck's light filters struggled to compensate. The vibrations through the hull intensified, became almost musical, a deep, resonant chord that made Holloway's chest ache in a way that wasn't unpleasant. She's crying," Patel said, and her own voice cracked. She lost her litter. She thought Sparky was dead. She's been searching for him for months. That's why she's been hitting the trade routes. She was looking. The Ktharn observer made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. It was hard to tell with his species. All those ships destroyed, he said quietly. All those lives lost. Because a mother was looking for her child. That's not on her, Holloway said. That's on everyone who shot first and never thought to ask questions. He made a decision then, the kind of decision that would either make him a hero or get him court-martialed, assuming he survived. Open the forward cargo bay. I'm going out. Captain Patel started. She's scared, Mira. She's hurt. And she's been alone for months, thinking her baby was dead. I know what that feels like. I know what she needs. He didn't wait for permission. He was already walking toward the airlock, pulling on a modified EVA suit that had been designed with void-borne contact in mind. Reinforced plating, extra insulation, and a small compartment on the chest where Sparky could ride if necessary. I'm going with you, Patel said, scrambling to catch up. No, you're not. Someone needs to stay on the ship and keep the comms open. And someone needs to make sure the compact doesn't do something stupid while I'm out there. He sealed his helmet, tucked Sparky into the chest compartment. The little void-born chirped happily and began purring, and stepped into the airlock. The void of space was cold and silent and utterly indifferent to his existence. Holloway had done spacewalks before, but never like this. Never toward something that could kill him with a casual flick of its tendrils. He activated his maneuvering thrusters and drifted toward the juvenile, his heart pounding so loudly that he could hear it through the suit's audio pickups. The juvenile's tendrils twitched as he approached. The glow at her center pulsed rapidly. Fear, Patel's voice said in his ear. She's afraid of you. She doesn't understand why you're coming closer. Tell her it's okay, Holloway said. Tell her I'm bringing Sparky home. Patel transmitted. Sparky chirped from his chest compartment, loud and insistent, and the juvenile's tendrils stopped twitching. The glow dimmed, steadied, became a slow, rhythmic pulse that matched Sparky's purring. She recognizes him, Patel said. She can sense him through your suit. She's calming down. Holloway kept drifting. 50 meters. 30. 10. He stopped at the edge of the juvenile's tendril range, close enough to see the individual structures of her form. The way the darkness wasn't truly black, but a complex interplay of folded dimensions. The way the glow at her center wasn't a single light, but thousands of tiny points arranged in patterns that looked almost like constellations. He reached up and unsealed the chest compartment. Sparky scrambled out, his tiny claws finding purchase on Holloway's suit, and launched himself into the void. For a terrible moment, the little void-born just floated there, suspended between human and mother, a tiny iridescent speck against the backdrop of infinite stars. Then, the juvenile's tendrils moved. They moved slowly, carefully, with a gentleness that Holloway would not have believed possible. One tendril curled around Sparky and drew him toward the juvenile's center. The glow intensified, and Holloway heard a sound through his suit's external pickups, a sound that shouldn't have been possible in vacuum, but that he heard anyway. It was a song, low and deep and full of something that felt like joy and grief and relief all tangled together. The juvenile was singing to her child, and the song resonated through Holloway's suit, through his bones, through his very soul. She's thanking you, Patel said, her voice barely a whisper. She's thanking all of us. She thought she'd never see him again. Holloway floated there for a long time, watching the two void-born embrace in the darkness. The juvenile's tendrils wrapped around Sparky in a way that looked almost like a hug, and the little one's scales flashed in patterns of pure, unmistakable happiness. Tell her she's welcome, Holloway said finally. Tell her we'd like to help her, if she'll let us. Patel transmitted the message. The juvenile's song changed, became questioning, curious. One tendril reached out toward Holloway, slowly, tentatively, and brushed against his suit's exterior. The touch was surprisingly warm. Not the cold of space, not the sterile cold of the suit's materials, but a living warmth like sunlight through a window. The tendril lingered for a moment, then withdrew. She wants to know what help means, Patel said. She doesn't understand. No one's ever offered before. Holloway smiled behind his helmet. Tell her we have food, and medicine, and a place where she can rest, away from the ships that want to hurt her. Tell her we're her neighbors, and neighbors take care of each other. He paused. And tell her we have Beethoven. Sparky's really into Beethoven. 3 months later, the Vri Council chamber was a very different place. The obsidian walls still pulsed with bioluminescent vines. The holographic projectors still hummed in their housings. But the atmosphere had shifted, a subtle change that Ambassador Thessal couldn't quite name, but felt in every interaction. The other species of the compact looked at humans differently now. Not with the condescending patience they had shown before, but with something closer to wariness. And perhaps beneath the wariness, a grudging respect. The holographic display at the center of the chamber showed the void-born juvenile, now named Lyra by her human rescuers, floating peacefully near the edge of human space. Her tendrils were extended in a relaxed posture that the compact xenobiologists had learned indicated contentment. The glow at her center pulsed in a slow, steady rhythm, like a heartbeat. Surrounding her were human ships. Not warships, not research vessels. Supply ships, freighters loaded with processed nutrient paste, medical supplies, and, according to the manifests, several containers of classical music recordings. The humans had set up a regular supply route to keep Lyra fed and healthy, and they had done it with efficiency that had surprised everyone, including themselves. She's gained 20% in mass, Dr. Meera Patel reported via holographic link from the Atlas. Her energy output has stabilized. She's no longer lashing out at passing ships because she doesn't need to. We're meeting her needs, and she's grateful. I know that sounds anthropomorphic, but I don't know how else to describe it. She understands that we're helping her, and she's responding with trust. Ambassador Yix's crystals flared with interest. Trust? In a Voidborn? That's unprecedented. They've never been known to form bonds with other species. They've never been given the chance, Patel said. Every other species in the galaxy has treated them as threats to be eliminated. Humans treated them as neighbors in need of assistance. The difference is profound. Ambassador Thessal's mandibles clicked in a pattern that indicated deep thought. And the compact's trade routes? The shipping lanes that were being disrupted? Completely reopened, Patel confirmed. Lyra has actually started guiding ships through dangerous areas of space. She seems to have a sense for gravitational anomalies and spatial distortions that our instruments can't detect. Several freighter captains have reported that she's helped them avoid hazards they didn't even know existed. The chamber buzzed with murmured conversations. Thessal raised a manipulator for silence. There's something else, he said, his tone carefully neutral. Something the HSS TAC intelligence network has observed. The Voidborn are changing. Their migration patterns are shifting. They're coming closer to compact space, but not in a threatening way. They're gathering near human colonies. Ambassador Quellen's scales rippled with concern. Gathering? How many? At last count, 23 individuals, including 2 adults and numerous juveniles. Thessal paused. They're not attacking. They're just there, floating near human settlements. Watching, waiting. He turned to face Ambassador Chinwei, who sat in her usual place with Sparky curled in her lap. The little Voidborn had grown again. He was now the size of a large cat, with scales that had settled into a pattern of deep blue and gold that the humans had started calling University of Michigan colors for reasons no one else understood. Ambassador Chun, Thessal said, "Your species has done something unprecedented. You've befriended a creature that has been the galaxy's greatest fear for millennia. And now more of them are coming. What do you intend to do about it?" Chin stroked Sparky's scales thoughtfully. The little Void-born purred, a sound that the chamber had grown accustomed to, though it still made some of the more skittish ambassadors uneasy. "We intend to welcome them," she said simply. We set up a neutral zone near the Proxima Centauri colony. It's not a military installation. It's a sanctuary. A place where Voidborn can come if they need help, if they're injured, if they're lost. We got teams of xenobiologists standing by. We got supply depots. We got translators running 24/7, trying to learn their language. You're inviting existential threats to settle next to your colonies, Yix said, her crystals flashing with alarm. No, Chen said. We're inviting neighbors to settle next to our colonies. There's a difference. You see a threat. We see a species that's been misunderstood, feared, and attacked for no reason other than being different. Sound familiar? She let the question hang in the air. The other ambassadors shifted uncomfortably. They all knew the history, the way the Compact had treated humanity when they first applied for membership, dismissing them as primitive and dangerous, questioning whether they deserve a place among the civilized species. We were wrong about the humans, Quellen said quietly, her scales shifting to a humble gray. Perhaps we've been wrong about the Voidborn as well. The chamber fell silent. Fessel's mandibles clicked slowly, thoughtfully. Ambassador Chun, he said finally, the Compact has a proposal. We would like to formalize the human-Voidborn relationship. Establish protocols for communication, trade, mutual defense. We would like to learn from what you've done. Chen's smile was gentle but firm. That's kind of you. But you don't need our permission. You need the Voidborns. They're not our property. They're not our pets. They're our friends. And friends make their own decisions. Sparky chirped in agreement, his scales flashing a pattern that the translators had come to recognize as approval. However, Chun continued, I will say this. The humans of Earth have a saying. It's an old one from our history, a time when we were afraid of the dark, afraid of the creatures that might be hiding in it. The saying is this. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes, or equivalent sensory organs, of every ambassador present. You've been afraid of the Voidborn for so long that you forgot to ask if they might be afraid too. You forgot to ask if they might need help. You forgot to ask if they might just want someone to understand them. She paused. Humans didn't forget, because we know what it's like to be the ones everyone fears. We know what it's like to be misunderstood. And we know that sometimes the scariest monsters are just lonely children looking for their mothers. Outside the chamber, somewhere in the depths of space, Lyra the Voidborn sang a song of gratitude to the stars. And somewhere near the Proxima Centauri colony, 23 other Voidborn listened and learned and began to hope. The galaxy would never be the same. Ambassador Thessal stood at the observation window of the Vree Council chamber, watching the distant lights of human ships moving through Voidborn territory without fear. Beside him, Ambassador Quellen's scales shifted through colors that indicated deep reflection. They're not what we thought, Thessal said quietly. None of them. Not the humans, not the Voidborn. We've spent millennia building a galaxy based on fear, and they spent a few months tearing it down with kindness. Quellen's scales settled on a color that the translators had learned to associate with hope, a soft, warm gold. The humans have a word for what they did. They call it adoption. It means taking something unwanted and making it family. The Voidborn are not unwanted anymore, Thessal observed. No, Quellen agreed. And neither are the humans. In the distance, Lyra's glow pulsed once, twice, 3 times, a pattern that the human xenobiologist had learned meant thank you. And somewhere on the Atlas, Captain Marcus Holloway watched the pulse and smiled because he understood now what the rest of the galaxy was only beginning to learn. The scariest thing in the universe wasn't the Voidborn. It was a species that looked at the scariest thing in the universe and decided to give a hug.